Section 2.5 is one of the more difficult sections for students in Chapter 2. It involves not too many numbers. In fact, we're just going to be using letters most of the time. So we're going to be solving for one of those letters. A little vocabulary word, a formula, is an equation that relates some quantities. For example, you should have memorized that distance equals rate times time. Or some other formulas that come to mind might be like area of a square is side squared, or area of a rectangle is length times width. See, these are all formulas. There's no real numbers involved. It's all just letters. Those are called formulas. In this section, we will be treating all these letters just like numbers, because remember what a definition of a variable is. It's a letter representing a number. So, for example, in this first equation here, this is like from section 2.2, where we're just going to divide both sides by 5. We see x equals 2. That's called solving. We solved it for x. All right, now let's come down here to the second example. Let's solve for t. That means to get t equals all by itself. When you say solve for t, that means to get t equals. Now, in the example above, we got rid of the number out front, which was a 5. We got rid of this number by dividing it away, and then we are left with 1x. So down here, we need to divide this r away, because it's attached to the t by multiplication. So to get rid of it, we divide both sides by r. We show all of our work. And what do you know? There is the answer. It's staring right at us, because these r's will cancel. T is the same thing as d over r. T equals d over r. We have solved for t. We've been learning this year all these legal algebra moves. I call them tools in your toolbox, that we can add on both sides the same thing, subtract, and so on, as long as it's the same thing on both sides. And every time we isolated the variable x in our examples. Well, now we're going to be isolating variables, and we're going to pretend everything else is a number. If we get confused, just ask ourselves, what would I do if everything else were a number? So if I wanted to solve this for r equals instead of t equals, that means we want to solve for r. That's called solving for r. We would get the t out of there by dividing it away, and whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. So rate equals d over t. So that's called solving for r. Perfectly legal algebra. We did the same thing on both sides. Here we have two examples. On the first one, I want to solve for b. That means get b by itself. So the a is the problem child here, as I like to say in class. We need to get rid of it there. So what we're going to do is, first of all, I'm going to erase what I wrote there. We are going to subtract a on both sides, because remember, we're trying to solve for b here. So b is now by itself, because after all, look here, that adds up to 0. b is c take away a. Now that's all we can do. We can't simplify c minus a. C minus a is c minus a, so that's all we can do. The answer is b equals c minus a. We have solved for b. On this next one, let's solve for a. To solve for a, you're going to have to take b away from both sides. Now a has been solved for, and it is c take away b. We just rewrote some formulas. That's all we're doing here, is we're rewriting formulas. We're shuffling the variables around. It's the same formula, just written differently. Here's a couple more very similar examples. In the first one, we're going to solve for d. We want to get d by itself, so we would divide by the number pi on both sides. So d, all by itself, would have to be the circumference divided by pi. That's called rewriting a formula. We haven't plugged anything in. We're not doing any calculations. We're simply solving for d. On the next one, they ask us to solve for r. So we have to get rid of the 2 and the pi. So to get rid of it, all we do here is divide by the number 2 pi, which you know is 6.28. Well, we're just going to keep it like this. Just divide by 2 pi, divide by 2 pi. R is now by itself. How do I know it's by itself? Because these guys right here, this cancels with that. Alright, so r is by itself. C over 2 pi equals r is the answer. I'm just throwing these things around, just like we learned when we had 5r equals 10. We divided both sides by the number in front of the r, it's called the coefficient, and we got our answer, 10 divided by 5. Same idea. This problem here is a little bit more difficult because we're going to solve for y. We're going to get y by itself. So the way we do that, it's a little trick, and you just need to memorize this. You are going to multiply both sides by y first. Multiply by y. Notice I had to put parentheses around the sum of a and b. Now we know x is a plus b, that number, times y. Then, to get y by itself, you would divide by the number out front, which is a plus b. Okay. And we see that those, I'm going to get out my yellow pen to cancel that then, and you see that y is equal to x over a plus b. So that's the little trick. This is a trick, and you need to memorize it and just practice it a few times, because the variable we were solving for was in the denominator here. So the first thing we had to do was basically move it up into the numerator, and then we can solve for it.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.